Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it?
We are so excited to get into this one today.
Yeah, today we are doing a massive deep dive into a place that is, well, it's highly requested but widely misunderstood. We're looking at the Isle of Man for the 2026 and 2027 travel seasons.
Right, and we're looking at every single data point, the flights, the ferries, hotel costs, the whole thing.
Exactly. So if you're planning a trip and want the honest, is it worth it verdict before you book, follow the show on Spotify or Apple.
Because you definitely need the honest verdict for this one. It's a tricky destination.
It really is. I want to start by having you picture a scenario. Imagine you have just flown overnight from New York to London.
Oh, the brutal red eye.
Right, you're exhausted. But, you're running on that pure vacation adrenaline. So you navigate the tube, you catch a train all the way up to Liverpool, and you're dragging your suitcase to the docks.
Just running on fumes and excitement.
Totally. And you're holding a $400 ferry ticket for this romantic, quiet getaway on a remote island in the Irish Sea. You walk up to the boarding agent, you hand over your passport, and they look at their screen, look back at you, and they say, "I'm sorry, you can't get on this boat."
It is genuinely the ultimate traveler's nightmare.
Your entire vacation ruined on the spot. You were sent back to London, out hundreds of dollars, and all because you didn't download like a $26 app that you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, and the worst part of that scenario is that the boarding agent isn't being vindictive or anything. They are legally mandated to turn you away.
It's an invisible wall.
Exactly. The invisible wall you just slammed into is the reality of modern border enforcement meeting a geographic anomaly.
And that geographic anomaly is what we really need to unpack today for you. Because for those who might just see a speck on a map when they look at the British Isles, the Isle of Man is this self-governing British Crown dependency. It's sitting right in the middle of the Irish Sea.
Right. It's roughly equidistant from England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales.
Right. And our mission today is to give you that rigorous, is it worth it verdict, because this island is incredibly deceptive, isn't it?
Oh, massively deceptive. We are so used to the modern travel industry just smoothing out the edges of a destination,
Yeah, you go to a booking site, click a button, and you get this standardized experience.
Exactly. But the Isle of Man is not a hidden gem just waiting to be discovered, and it's also not a streamlined tourist trap. It is a very well-run, honestly quite expensive piece of rock with a microscopic economy.
And planning a trip there right now, specifically in 2026 and 2027, it requires navigating this really awkward transition period in British immigration law.
Which brings us back to that traveler crying at the Liverpool docks, right?
Yeah, let's dig into that, because before we even talk about the beautiful castles or, the vintage steam trains, we have to talk about how you actually get in. Let's call this trap number one, the ETA boarding trap.
Right, the ETA trap.
You called it an invisible wall earlier. What exactly is happening here? Why are people getting turned away?
Well, to understand the trap, you really have to understand what a crown dependency actually is, because the Isle of Man is not part of the United Kingdom.
It's not UK.
No, it's not the UK, and it's not part of the European Union either. It has its own parliament, which is called the Tynwald.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's actually the oldest continuous parliament in the world.
Yeah.
So they make their own domestic laws. However, and this is the big catch, it relies on the UK for defense and, crucially, for international relations and border enforcement.
Ah, okay. So it's legally its own thing entirely. But functionally, when you're crossing the border, the UK is the one pulling the strings.
Exactly. And that is exactly where the trap springs. As of April 23, 2026, the UK government started strictly enforcing its electronic travel authorization, the ETA, across the board.
And that includes access to the crown dependencies.
Yes.
Okay, so let's establish exactly who this impacts right now. If you are listening to this, how do you know if you need this ETA thing?
It applies to all non-visa nationals. So if you are a U.S. citizen, a Canadian citizen, an Australian, or a traveler from the European Union, you are now required to have an ETA.
Okay, so what does that actually look like? What do I have to do?
You basically have to download an app on your phone, scan your passport chip, answer a few basic security questions, and pay £20.
Which is what, like 26 US dollars?
Yeah, it fluctuates around $26. That digital authorization then links to your passport, and it's valid for 2 years.
On the surface, spending $26 and taking 5 minutes on an app doesn't sound like a massive hurdle, right? Like we do this for Europe, the ETS, we do it for the US with ESTA. Why is this catching people off guard specifically for the Isle of Man?
Because there's a massive communication gap, and it's caused by something called the Common Travel Area.
ETA, right?
Yeah. The Common Travel Area is this open borders agreement between the UK, Ireland, and the Crown dependencies. So British and Irish citizens are completely exempt from the ETA. They can move freely.
Oh, I see the friction here. Because the vast majority of tourists who actually visit the Isle of Man are just British people taking a domestic holiday.
Exactly.
So the ferry companies and the local tourism boards, they aren't necessarily blasting these huge ETA warnings and big red letters on their home pages because their main customer base doesn't need it.
Precisely. If you're an American traveler, you might be researching your trip using blogs or forums written by folks from Manchester or London.
And those writers have never even heard of an ETA.
Exactly, because they've never needed one. So our American traveler flies into London Heathrow, clears customs, using their ETA for the UK, right? And then maybe they spend a few days in England.
Sounds like a normal trip so far.
Right. But then they decide to take a domestic flight or a ferry over to the Isle of Man. And they assume, quite logically, well, I'm already inside the UK border. This is just a domestic hop.
But the airline, or the ferry company, is legally required to check your passport again before you cross the Irish Sea.
Yes, they are. The carriers get financially penalized heavily if they transport someone without valid clearance. The trap is that assumption of domestic travel.
Right.
You must treat the Isle of Man with the exact same bureaucratic respect as crossing an international border, even if you are just taking a little puddle jumper flight from Manchester.
Okay, but let's say I mess up. If I don't have it, can I just, download the app right there at the ferry terminal? Just pay the $26 while I'm standing in line and wait a minute.
You can try, but the system is not always instantaneous. The official advice from the government is that it can take up to 3 working days for approval.
3 days.
Yeah, if your application gets flagged for manual review for whatever reason, and you are standing at the ferry terminal in Liverpool, well, the boat is going to leave without you.
And you lose your non-refundable tickets.
You lose the tickets, and your hotel booking on the island is likely forfeit as well, since it's a no-show.
That is brutal. So the absolute baseline rule here, before we discuss anything else today, is what we call the skip-if rule.
Right, the skip-if rule.
If you are a non-British or non-Irish traveler, and you are not willing to secure this ETA well in advance, just skip the trip. Do not play chicken with the UK border force.
Absolutely. The bureaucracy is entirely unforgiving.
All right, so let's assume we've navigated the red tape. We have our ETA safely linked to our passports. We're good to go. The next massive decision you have to make is when to actually cross that sea.
Timing is everything here.
Because looking at this data you brought, the Isle of Man doesn't just have high and low seasons like a normal place. It basically has a split personality.
Yeah.
It effectively has 2 entirely different identities depending on what week you arrive.
That is a really great way to frame it. The overarching window for visiting, generally speaking, is May to September. But right in the middle of that window sits an economic and cultural anomaly that entirely consumes the island.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it is a logistical black hole. I'm talking about the TT races.
The tourist trophy. Now, for anyone listening who isn't a motorsport fanatic, this is one of the most famous and, frankly, most dangerous motorcycle races in the entire world.
It is. It's the defining cultural event of the Isle of Man. Just to give you the specific timeline, in 2026, the dates were May 25th to June 6th. And for 2027, you are looking at a nearly identical late May to early June window.
Okay, let's dig into the mechanics of this, because I really want to understand how a 2-week race can dictate an entire island's economy. Like, if I accidentally book a trip during those 2 weeks without realizing it, what exactly am I walking into?
You are walking into a complete infrastructural takeover. I mean, the island's population is normally around 84,000 people, right?
Right, which is pretty small.
Yeah, but during the TT, it swells by tens of thousands of visitors. And this isn't a race taking place on some closed circuit out in the quiet countryside.
It's not.
No, the famous mountain course uses the island's actual public road network.
Wait, they just shut down the main road so motorcycles can race through people's villages.
Literally, yes.
How do locals even get to work or go to the grocery store?
With extreme difficulty and highly orchestrated scheduling, the government literally passes legislative acts to close the roads. So you have motorcycles racing past front doors, stone walls, and local pubs at speeds upward of 200 miles per hour.
That is insane.
It is. And the main promenade in the capital, Douglas, which is normally quite sedate, very Victorian and quiet, it turns into this massive carnival of taddocks, beer tents, and just thousands of parked bikes.
It's like trying to book a quiet, romantic weekend in New Orleans and accidentally arriving on Fat Tuesday during Mardi Gras.
That's the perfect analogy.
The entire environment is just hostile to the idea of a peaceful vacation. But what does this do to the economics? If tens of thousands of people are flooding an island built for 84,000, the math on beds just doesn't add up.
The math completely breaks down, and that causes a staggering economic distortion across the whole year. Because the island's housing and hotel infrastructure are so constrained, the TT bends the entire year's pricing curve.
Really? Just those 2 weeks?
Just those 2 weeks. Room rates don't just go up by 20%, they triple or quadruple.
Wow.
Budget beds completely vanish. Locals even rent out their front lawns for people to pitch tents because there are no rooms left.
Okay, so if I'm looking at 2027 and I actually want to see the TT, I assume I can't just casually book a hotel next April.
Oh, definitely not. If you want to see the 2027 TT, you should be booking right now, today. Ideally, you need a 12-month lead time. And the ferry slots for vehicles, they sell out almost the day they are released.
Unbelievable. And conversely, if I don't care about motorcycles or if I just want to, ride the vintage trains and look at castles, I must avoid late May and early June as if my life depends on it.
Correct. It is a complete misallocation of your travel budget to go during the TT if you aren't there for the racing. You'll pay premium prices for an event you don't even care about.
Okay, so if we take the TT out of the equation, where does that leave the rest of the calendar? Let's say I want to go in the dead of summer, July or August.
July and August offer the best statistical chance of good weather, the longest daylight hours, and a really robust calendar of cultural events like the Isle of Man Festival of the Sea.
Sounds ideal.
It sounds ideal, but you have to understand the macroeconomics of British tourism.
Right.
In July and August, you are now competing directly with the UK school holidays. Millions of British families are suddenly looking for domestic travel options, and demand spikes.
Ah, I see.
Consequently, hotel rates in Douglas remain at a premium all through the summer.
So peak summer is premium pricing, and it's potentially pretty crowded. What is the sweet spot then? Where do I get the most value for my dollar without freezing to death?
The absolute sweet spot for a general tourist is early May, so right before the TT madness begins, and September.
Early May and September, got it.
Yeah, during those two shoulder season windows, the heritage railways are fully operational, the castles are open, the weather is usually workable, but the hotel rates soften noticeably because the British kids are back in school.
Makes perfect sense. But what about the winter? Because I have to admit, I'm always tempted when I see a ridiculously cheap airfare in January. Like, I'll see something online that's like, ooh, $40 to fly to an island. Let's go.
Yeah, that brings us to what we call the dead zone, November through March.
The dead zone.
Do not take the bait of a cheap flight. The Irish Sea in winter is vicious. The island gets battered by wet, freezing winds. It's incredibly bleak.
Doesn't sound like a fun vacation.
It's not. But more importantly, from a planning perspective, the island effectively half shuts down.
What do you mean by half shuts down? Do the restaurants close?
Many rural pubs and restaurants reduce their hours drastically, yeah. But the critical failure for a tourist is that the island's primary attractions, the heritage railways, Laxey Wheel, those outdoor heritage sites, they often operate on highly restricted winter timetables, or they just close entirely for maintenance.
Oh, so you can't even see the stuff you went there to see.
Exactly. Add to that the fact that rough seas frequently delay or cancel the ferries, and sea fog grounds the flights. You might literally get stuck there with absolutely nothing to do. Unless you are traveling for business or visiting family, winter is a total trap.
Okay, so we are logically targeting September. The weather is decent, the kids are in school, the trains are running, the ETA is all sorted out. Now we have to physically cross the Irish Sea.
Right, the logistics of arrival.
And looking at this data, this is where your budget can absolutely hemorrhage if you don't know what you're doing. Let's look at the air options first.
Air travel is usually the most efficient, honestly. You would fly into Ronaldsway Airport, which is airport code IOM. It's a small regional airport located about 10 miles south of the capital, Douglas.
Who's actually flying this route? I imagine you aren't getting massive Boeing 777s landing there.
No, definitely not. It's strictly regional traffic. You're looking at carriers like Loganair or EasyJet, flying out of hubs like Liverpool, Manchester, or London.
And what's the price like?
Economically, if you catch a quiet midweek day, you can find a one-way ticket for around $36.
That's really cheap.
It is, but realistically, when you factor in bags and standard timing, you should budget between $90 and $200 for a return flight.
Honestly, 90 to 200 return is entirely reasonable for an island hop. But what happens when I land? 10 miles to the capital isn't far, but I know airport transfers can be a really predatory market.
The transfer is actually remarkably painless. Ronald's Way is super small. You get off the plane, grab your bag, and you're out the door in minutes.
Nice.
You can catch a public bus right into Douglas for about $4 to $5, which is a fantastic value. Or, if you want a taxi, it will run you roughly $26 to $33.
Wait, I love a good train. Is there a train from the airport?
Well, there's a quirk here. There is no modern commuter train. However, the vintage Isle of Man steam railway does run from the nearby village of Ballasalla into Douglas during the summer season.
Oh, that sounds amazing.
It sounds amazing, but it is not practical airport transit with modern luggage. Take the bus.
Fair enough, I'll take the bus. So flying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But I feel like there is a massive romance to arriving by sea, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people really want to take the ferry.
And the sea arrival is genuinely iconic. The Isle of Man Steam Packet Company operates a vessel called the MV Manxman. And unlike many modern ferry terminals that just leave you stranded in some industrial port miles from the city center, the Manxman docks right on the Douglas waterfront.
Oh, that's perfect.
For foot passengers, this is an incredible convenience win. You can literally walk down the gangway, roll your suitcase along the promenade, and be checking into your hotel 5 minutes later.
I love that. And a foot passenger ticket is cheap, right?
It's a total bargain. Depending on the season, a single foot passenger ticket is only $33 to $60.
Okay, but here is where things get completely wild in the data. Let's talk about trap number 2. The car ferry cost and slot trap. Let's say I don't want to be a foot passenger. I want to bring my own car or a rental car from the UK mainland. What happens then?
If you choose to bring a car, that $60 ticket completely vanishes. A return ticket for a vehicle on the steam packet will cost you anywhere from $260 in the dead of winter to a staggering $470 during the summer season.
Okay, I have to push back on this because that price point just feels insane to me. I could fly to Southern Europe for $470. We are so conditioned as travelers to think we need a vehicle, especially when visiting a rural island. My immediate instinct is to bring a car so I have freedom. Why is it so incredibly expensive?
It really comes down to maritime economics and the lack of state subsidies.
What do you mean?
Well, if you look at Scotland, for example, their ferry network, which is called CalMac, it's heavily subsidized by the Scottish government because it is viewed as vital infrastructure for the island community.
Right, they need it to survive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Isle of Man steam packet operates quite differently. They have a virtual monopoly on the route, and the actual logistics of transporting heavy vehicles across a highly volatile stretch of water are expensive. So they just pass that cost directly to the consumer.
So they can charge whatever the market will bear. But why are we calling this a trap? If I want to pay $470 for the freedom of a car, isn't that just my choice as a traveler?
It is your choice, but it is often a massive waste of resources based on a total misunderstanding of how tourists actually spend their time there.
Okay, lay it out for me.
The trap is paying $470, enduring a potentially queasy 3-hour crossing, driving your car off the boat in Douglas, and then just leaving it parked outside your hotel for 6 days.
Because I'm spending my whole trip walking around the capital or taking the vintage trains.
Exactly. The primary tourist itinerary on the Isle of Man involves taking the Manx Electric Railway up the coast or the steam railway down south. If you do that, your $470 car is just an incredibly expensive metal paperweight sitting on the promenade.
That is a brutal realization.
And furthermore, if you wait too long to book a car slot during the peak summer, you might find there are literally 0 spaces left. The vehicle deck capacity on the ferry is rigid.
Okay, so let's synthesize this. Who actually needs to pay for the car ferry?
You only need a car if your specific itinerary is highly decentralized.
Like what?
If you are renting a remote self-catering cottage in the far north near Ramsey or down in the deep south near Port St. Mary,
Right.
and you plan to hike obscure coastal paths every single day where the buses don't run, then yes, you need a car.
Right.
But if you are a first-time visitor staying in Douglas, wanting to do the standard heritage itinerary, save your $400, walk on as a foot passenger.
That makes perfect sense.
Mm.
But let's say I take your advice. I save the $400, I walk onto the ferry, I stroll over to my hotel on the Douglas Promenade. I feel very smug about how much money I've saved. How easy is it to actually explore the rest of the island without a car?
To answer that, we really have to map out the geography of the island.
You're right.
The island is roughly 33 miles long and 13 miles wide. Douglas is the capital on the east coast, and it is very walkable, featuring these really long loch and central promenades.
Nice.
Then on the west coast, you have Peel, which is famous for its massive castle ruins and its traditional kipper smokehouses.
I've heard of the Peel Kippers.
Yeah, they're famous. Then down south, you have Port Erin and Port St. Mary, which are lovely, quiet bays. Up north is Ramsey. And then nestled on the east coast, north of Douglas, is Laxey, which is home to the famous Great Laxey Wheel. And also down south is Castletown, which is the ancient capital.
It sounds like a lot of distinct, spread out little hubs.
Mm.
Which brings us to a psychological pitfall I want to unpack. Let's call it trap number 3, the no-car transport illusion.
Yes, this is the exact flip side of the car ferry trap we just talked about.
How so?
Because Douglas is so incredibly walkable, and because you see these charming vintage trains chugging out of the station right there, visitors get lulled into a false sense of security. They assume the entire island is a seamless, easily navigable public transit utopia.
I call this the theme park illusion.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's a flaw in how the human brain misjudges scale and logistics when we are in a tourist mindset, right? You walk into a massive theme park, the entrance is beautifully paved, everything is walkable, there's a little tram right at the gate. You assume the whole place is designed for your effortless convenience.
Right.
But if you are at the very back of that theme park at midnight and you just want a snack or to go home, you suddenly realize you are miles away from anything and you're stranded. People look at a map of an island, see it's only 33 miles long and think, oh, I'll just hop on a bus whenever.
The theme park illusion is a brilliant way to describe it because the reality of Manx public transport is governed by harsh economics. During the daytime, the bus network connecting these hubs is actually quite decent.
But at night.
But the evening and off-season schedules thin out drastically.
Because there just isn't the local population density to support running empty buses to a remote village at 10 p.m.?
Exactly. And those incredibly charming heritage railways we mentioned, the steam trains and electric trams, they are magnificent, but they are not modern rapid transit.
They don't run 24/7.
Not at all. They are slow, they are highly seasonal, and they stop running quite early in the evening. They are tourist experiences, not commuter lifelines.
So what is the actual penalty here? Let's play this out. Let's say I take the bus out to Peel on the west coast to look at the castle. I have a few pints of local ale. I watch the sunset over the sea. What happens next?
Well, the sun sets, you walk to the bus stop, and you realize the last bus back to Douglas left an hour ago. You are now stranded on the west coast.
Oh, no.
Yeah, your only option is to call a local taxi. And because the island is rural and gas is expensive, that taxi ride back to your hotel in Douglas is going to cost you between $40 and $60 US.
Yikes.
If you make that mistake twice on your trip, you have just spent the money you thought you saved by not bringing a car.
Ouch. The island just punishes you for a lack of logistical rigor. So how do we fix this? Because I am stubborn and I still refuse to pay $470 for the car ferry. How do I navigate this island without getting stranded?
The fix is twofold. Logical clustering and a piece of plastic called the Go Explore card.
Okay, what's the card?
The Go Explore card is a multi-day travel pass that gives you unlimited travel on scheduled bus services, the Steam Railway, the Manx Electric Railway, and the Snaefell Mountain Railway. It is the best value on the island, bar none.
And the clustering, how does that work?
You have to treat your itinerary like a military operation. You cluster your sightseeing strictly by geography. You dedicate one day entirely to the south, taking the steam train down to Castletown and Port Erin, and you literally set an alarm on your phone for the last train back.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah. Then you dedicate another day to the west coast, to Peel. You have to balance the romance of the Victorian steam train with the rigid, unyielding reality of its timetable.
I love that. It's about deliberate travel, not just spontaneous, clueless wandering. Okay, so we have conquered the geography, the red tape of the ETA, and the transport traps. Let's talk about day-to-day survival on the island. Beds, food, and what this is actually going to cost you, because you hinted earlier that the Isle of Man is not a discount destination.
It really isn't. When budgeting, you need to think of the Isle of Man as being priced roughly like a prosperous mid-sized British mainland town, but with an added premium for being an island.
Let's break down the accommodation tiers then, starting with the backpacker or the budget traveler. I always love the backpacker challenge. How cheap can we go? If I'm a student or just incredibly frugal, what's my absolute floor price?
Brace yourself. Outside of the TT races, your absolute floor price for a night in central Douglas or Peel is going to sit between $78 and $117 US.
Hold on, $78 to $117 for a hostel bed? That's outrageous.
Well, that is the critical detail. True backpacker hostels with cheap $20 dorm beds and shared kitchens effectively do not exist on the Isle of Man.
Wait, really? Why not? Every tourist destination in Europe has hostels. Is there a law against them or something?
It's a combination of real estate economics and intentional tourism strategy. The property values in central Douglas are quite high, driven by the offshore finance sector that operates on the island.
Finance money.
Exactly. A building that could be a cheap hostel is much more profitable if it's converted into flats or premium guest houses. Furthermore, the island has historically targeted an older, heritage-focused demographic, or the motorsport crowd, who are generally willing to spend real money.
So they don't want the budget crowd.
Right, they have not courted the ultra-budget party backpacker crowd at all. So the budget tier here simply means a very modest, maybe slightly dated guest house. If you are used to backpacking through Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe on a shoestring, the Isle of Man will obliterate your budget in 48 hours.
Okay, that is a really vital warning. So the backpacker is mostly priced out. What if I'm traveling with my partner? We want something mid-range. You know, a nice view of the sea, a clean room, maybe a decent breakfast included.
For a mid-range couple, looking at the Douglas promenades, or places in Peel or Port Erin, you should budget $130 to $195 per night.
Okay, that's more standard.
Yes. However, a quick logistical warning. If you book a sea-facing room right on the promenade in Douglas, be prepared for some weekend noise. That strip is where the island's nightlife and pubs are concentrated.
Let me do the math on this live because this is where reality really sets in. A mid-range couple is paying, let's split the difference, $160 a night, plus 2 Go Explore transit cards, plus food, which we haven't even talked about yet. You're easily looking at $355 a day for 2 people.
Yep, easily.
Plus the $200 flights just to get there. At $355 a day, I'd go to Tuscany. I could go to the Greek islands. Why on earth would I spend that to wear a sweater on a freezing beach in the Irish Sea?
That is the ultimate question. And we will get to the specific value proposition, the safety, the unique heritage in a moment. But you are entirely correct to highlight the sticker shock. This is not a Sun and Sangria budget getaway, and the numbers just scale up for families.
Yeah, let's talk about families. Traveling with kids is expensive enough already.
For a family of 4, you're looking at $160 to $260 a night for accommodation alone. The absolute best strategy for families is to avoid hotels entirely and rent a self-catering cottage or apartment.
To cook your own food.
Exactly, because avoiding restaurant prices for breakfast and dinner is the only way to protect your wallet from total devastation.
And what if I have a massive budget? What if I want the ultimate 5-star luxury treatment? Spas, infinity pools, Michelin stars.
You will be quite disappointed. The luxury tier runs $234 to $390 a night, but the market is very, very limited.
No 5-star resorts.
No, the top-end hotels are perfectly comfortable, but they are modest by international luxury standards. There are no sprawling mega resorts here. It's just not that kind of island.
And finally, what about remote workers? The digital nomads who want to stay for a month and work from their laptops.
It is a genuinely poor pick for a digital nomad. To survive for a month, you were looking at spending between $2,300 and $2,500 US. The rent for a city center apartment alone is around $576.
That's steep for a small island.
It is. And beyond the cost, the infrastructure just isn't there. Short-term lets outside of the TT are scarce. Dedicated co-living spaces are rare, and you're paying premium UK prices for a very quiet, very isolated lifestyle.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that families need to self-cater to survive.
Right.
Let's talk about the supply chain of food. Because if it costs $470 to bring a tiny car across the Irish Sea, it must cost an absolute fortune to bring a truck full of groceries. Where are we shopping and what are we eating?
You've hit on the core economic reality of island life. Everything that isn't grown or caught on the island has to come over on the boat. That maritime freight cost is baked into every single item on the shelf.
Where do locals shop?
For groceries, you have familiar UK supermarkets, ShopRite, Tesco, and Marks & Spencer in Douglas.
Give me some baseline prices so we can calibrate our expectations.
Sure. Even basic staples reflect that island premium. You'll pay around $1.50 for a standard bottle of water. A loaf of bread will run you 1.8 euro to 2.6 euro. A dozen eggs is about 3.50.
Okay, that's noticeably higher than the mainland, but it's not apocalyptic. What if I want to eat local? I always prefer to buy what's produced right there on the island.
Then you are in for a real treat, because Manx produce is excellent. You absolutely must try the Isle of Man Creamery for dairy. Their cheese is fantastic.
Okay, cheese is on the list.
And when you go to Peel, you have to visit Moore's traditional cures. They make Manx kippers, which are smoked herring using traditional oak fires. It's a real craft.
I love smoked fish.
It's the best. You should also look out for queenies, which are local, sustainably caught queen scallops. And finally, low-tan lamb.
Low-tan, what's that?
The Manx low-tan is a native breed of sheep with dark brown wool, and they often sport 4 or even 6 horns.
6 horns. That sounds like a mythical creature.
It does, but the meat is considered a true delicacy.
That sounds incredible. But what happens if I'm tired of cooking in my self-catering cottage and I just want to sit down at a pub for a nice meal?
A standard, inexpensive meal or a pub main course will cost about $28 per person.
$28 just for a pub meal.
Yeah. A pint of local ale is roughly $6. A flat white coffee in a cafe is $4.20. Even a simple portion of takeaway fish and chips will run you about $12.
So if a family of 4 eats out 3 times a day at $28 a head for lunch and dinner, plus breakfast, that is over $250 a day just on food. That absolutely destroys a family budget.
Completely, which is why you have to understand what you are implicitly paying for when you visit. When you pay those food and hotel prices, you aren't just paying for the meal or the bed, you are paying an environmental premium.
What does that mean?
You are paying to be in a place with incredibly low crime, a place with spotless streets, a place that is famously safe for solo female travelers. You are paying for the peace of mind that comes from being on a highly regulated, wealthy island.
That is a fascinating way to justify the cost. You're buying the stability of the environment.
Yeah.
Speaking of buying things, let's talk about etiquette and currency. Do I tip my bartender? Do I need to exchange my US dollars for some special island money?
Tipping follows the standard UK model. It's not the heavy 20% culture of the US. You tip about 10% in a sit-down restaurant, assuming a service charge hasn't already been added to the bill. But the currency situation is one of the most fascinating quirks of the island.
Tell me about it.
They use the Manx pound.
Wait, why do they have their own money if they rely on the UK for everything else internationally?
It comes back to that fierce independence as a crown dependency. Printing their own money is a profound symbol of national pride. But there's also a real economic reason called seigniorage.
Seigniorage.
Yeah, the Manx government actually earns interest on the backing funds for the currency they issue, which provides solid revenue for the island.
Okay, but how does it trade? Do I have to check an exchange rate every morning on my phone?
No, thankfully not. The Manx pound is pegged exactly 1-to-1 with the British pound sterling.
So a pound is a pound. If I have a British 20-pound note from London, can I use it in Douglas?
Yes. British pounds are accepted everywhere on the Isle of Man without question. But, and this is a critical, highly localized trap, it does not work in reverse. Manx notes are completely worthless in shops on the UK mainland.
Wait, really? The UK border force guards the island, but the UK shops won't take the money. What happens if I have 50 Manx pounds in my wallet? I take the ferry back to Liverpool and I try to buy a coffee at the train station.
The barista will look at you like you are handing them Monopoly money. It is not legal tender in the UK.
Wow.
You absolutely must spend your Manx notes or physically swap them at a bank before you leave the island. Do not get stuck with them.
I love that. It's such a specific, frustrating, brilliant piece of local friction. Okay, so we're paying mid-tier European prices, we're navigating invisible ETA border walls, we're dodging worthless currency, and we're paying $470 for a ferry if we're foolish enough to bring a car.
The friction is very high.
The friction is high. So what exactly are we getting for our money? Let's look at the island's report card. Unpack the highlights for us. Give me the absolute best of the Isle of Man.
Well, outside of the pure adrenaline of the TT races, the absolute standout attractions are the heritage railways. And this isn't just one old train. It is an entire network that has been beautifully, painstakingly preserved. The crown jewel of it all is the Snaefell Mountain Railway.
Snaefell being the highest mountain on the island, right?
Exactly. It's this electric tramway that climbs 621 meters to the absolute summit of the island.
And what is the payoff when you actually reach the top? Is it just a rocky peak?
Oh, the payoff is one of the most unique geographical views in the world. They say that on a clear day from the summit of Snaefell, you can see 7 kingdoms.
7 kingdoms. like Game of Thrones.
Sort of. England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, the Isle of Man itself, the sea, and the Kingdom of Heaven.
Okay, that is just poetic marketing right there.
Uh,
I am completely sold on the view. How much does it cost to get up there?
it's roughly $20 for a return ticket, though it is fully included if you bought that Go Explore Transit card we mentioned. Beyond the mountain, you also have the Manx Electric Railway, which runs along the dramatic eastern cliffs from Douglas all the way up to Ramsey. And then you have the steam railway, which uses original locomotives and carriages from the 1870s, just puffing its way down south to Port Erin.
It sounds like an absolute paradise for transport nerds.
It really is. But the industrial heritage goes way beyond trains. In Laxey, you will find the Great Laxey Wheel, affectionately known as Lady Isabella.
Lady Isabel.
Yeah, it was built in 1854, and it is the largest working water wheel in the world. It was designed to pump water out of the local lead and zinc mines. It's an incredible piece of Victorian engineering, and entry is only about $10.
I'm a sucker for a good castle, too. How does the island deliver on medieval history?
Brilliantly. You have two massive standouts. Peel Castle, located on St. Patrick's Isle on the west coast, is a stunning, sprawling ruin that actually dates back to the Vikings.
Viking ruins. That's awesome.
Yeah, and then down south in Castletown, you have Castle Rushen, which is remarkably intact and ranks as one of the best preserved medieval castles in all of Europe. Add to that the Manx Museum in Douglas, which does a fantastic job of tying 10,000 years of Celtic and Viking history together.
And how much is the museum?
Remarkably, entry to the museum is completely free.
What about the natural environment? We talked about the mountain, but what if I just want to put on my boots and hike?
The entire island is recognized as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, meaning there is a deep structural commitment to balancing conservation with sustainable development.
So it's very pristine.
Yes.
Wow.
Because it is so isolated and lacks heavy industry, it offers incredibly dark skies, making it a premier destination for stargazing. For hikers, the ultimate challenge is the Rodney Foyon, or the Way of the Gull.
The Way of the Gull.
It is a nearly 100-mile coastal footpath that wraps around the entire island, offering sheer cliffs, hidden coves, and just sweeping views.
Okay, that all sounds incredibly idyllic. It paints a picture of this pristine Victorian time capsule. But it can't all be perfect, right? We promised a rigorous audit. What are the honest disappointments? Where does the Isle of Man let you down, especially when you are paying $355 a day?
We have to be brutally honest about the physical environment. The Irish Sea is freezing.
Freezing.
Yes. The scenery is rugged and dramatic, yes, but the beaches are strictly for brisk, bracing walks.
So the beaches here are strictly for wearing a thick wool sweater, staring into the middle distance, and contemplating the harsh realities of your life choices. They are definitely not for lying on a towel and working on your tan.
Precisely. If you want a beach holiday, you are on the wrong piece of rock.
Good to know.
Furthermore, we have to talk about Douglas itself. While the promenade is pleasant, the capital can feel a bit tired. Some of those grand Victorian hotel facades have definitely seen better days. It just lacks the polish of a high-end mainland resort town.
But the biggest gamble, the thing that can ruin everything you just described, is the weather, right? Because it's a rock in the middle of a notoriously moody sea.
The weather dictates the entire value proposition of your trip. If you get a week of sunshine, the island is glorious. But if you get a wet, windy week, which is entirely possible even in July, your outdoor heavy itinerary completely collapses.
Because you can't hike or take the trains.
Right. The spectacular views from the Snaefell Mountain Railway disappear entirely into thick white fog. The coastal hiking paths become miserable and potentially very dangerous due to high winds and slippery mud.
So what do you do if it rains?
Well, that's the problem.
Ah.
Crucially, the island's indoor rainy day options are fairly thin. You can only spend so many hours in the Manx Museum or sitting in a pub watching the rain lash against the windows before you go stir crazy.
Speaking of things being potentially dangerous on those coastal paths, let's talk about safety. You mentioned earlier that the crime rate is exceptionally low.
It is. The Isle of Man routinely scores near the top of global safety indices. Violent crime against tourists is virtually non-existent. It is an incredibly safe place to walk alone at night in the towns. The risks here are entirely environmental, not criminal.
Environmental risks meaning what? The freezing water.
The cold sea, the exposed cliff paths with sudden drops, and uniquely, the roads.
Oh, right, the TT. Because of the motorsport culture, I imagine people drive pretty fast.
It's more than just a culture, it's the law. Outside of the towns and villages, parts of the rural road network, particularly the mountain road, actually have no general speed limit.
Wait, no speed limit at all, like the Autobahn in Germany.
Exactly. Outside of race season, the roads are generally quiet, but they are twisting, rural, and can be deceptively fast. Locals are very used to it, but a tourist in a rental car who isn't expecting a vehicle to approach at 90 miles per hour over a blind crest can really get into trouble. If you are driving, you must remain highly vigilant.
And what happens if you do get into trouble? Let's talk about the medical infrastructure, because I know that can be tricky on islands.
They have a very capable facility, Nobles Hospital, located near Douglas. However, it is a small island hospital. They can handle standard emergencies, broken bones, and basic illnesses. But if you suffer a severe complex trauma, you will likely require a specialized medical airlift to a major trauma center on the UK mainland.
And who pays for that helicopter ride?
That is the vital question. The UK and the Isle of Man have a reciprocal health agreement, meaning British residents get free emergency care. But if you are visiting from the US, Canada, or the EU, you are not covered by that agreement.
So you're on the hook for it.
Yes. You absolutely must purchase comprehensive travel insurance that explicitly covers medical evacuation. If you need to be airlifted to Liverpool without insurance, it will bankrupt you.
Okay, so let's pause and take stock of all this. We have an island that requires a $26 ETA permit just to enter. It costs $470 to bring a car. You can't rely on the evening buses. The hotels are expensive and lack budget hostels. The weather can wipe out your itinerary in an instant, and the beaches are
Oh,
freezing.
that's the friction.
Yet, on the flip side, it has world-class heritage railways, stunning castles, zero crime, and the biggest motorcycle race on Earth. If all that friction is making a listener hesitate right now, let's look at the alternatives. Because the Isle of Man isn't the only island around Britain.
It certainly isn't, and comparing it to the alternatives really clarifies who should actually go where. There are two main alternatives we should examine. The first is the Isle of Wight, which is located down on the south coast of England.
How does the Isle of Wight compare to the Isle of Man?
It is much gentler. Because it is located in the English Channel, the microclimate is warmer. It is generally cheaper, and crucially, the logistics are vastly simpler.
No ETA.
Exactly. Because it is unequivocally part of England, there is no ETA requirement for domestic travelers once you're in the UK. And the ferry crossing from places like Portsmouth or Southampton is very short and a fraction of the cost, often well under $100 for a return foot passenger.
So if I just want a cute, easy, relatively affordable British island break with my family, and I want to sit on a beach that won't give me hypothermia, I should go south to the Isle of Wight.
Yes. The Isle of Wight is the path of least resistance. The second alternative to consider would be the Scottish Islands, specifically places like the Isle of Arran or the Isle of Mull on the west coast.
When I hear Scotland, I immediately think of dramatic, wild landscapes. How do they stack up against the Isle of Man?
They are much wilder, the mountains are bigger, the terrain is more rugged, and the wildlife viewing, we're talking eagles, red deer, seals, is far superior to the Isle of Man. But the biggest difference comes back to logistics and cost.
The ferries.
Right. The Scottish Comet car ferries are heavily subsidized by the government. Bringing a car to the Isle of Arran costs less than half of what the steam packet charges to reach the Isle of Man.
Okay, so the Isle of Wight is easier and warmer. The Scottish Islands are wilder and cheaper for drivers. So where exactly does the Isle of Man win? Why endure the ETA, the $470 ferry, and the expensive hotels to go there instead of Wight or Mull?
The Isle of Man wins on three very specific, highly unique fronts. First, the sheer density and preservation of its operational heritage railways. You cannot find this specific Victorian transport ecosystem anywhere else in the world.
The transport nerds rejoice.
They really do. Second, the distinct national identity. The Isle of Man feels different. It has its own parliament, its own laws, its own quirky currency. It is a genuine Celtic time capsule. And third, of course, if you are a motorsport fan, the TT races have no equal anywhere on the planet.
All right, this has been an intense audit. Let's bring all this data, all of these costs, and all of these alternatives together into our final worth it matrix. We're going to score the Isle of Man out of 10 for 5 different profiles of travelers based on everything we just unpacked. Let's start with the backpacker.
For a backpacker, the Isle of Man is a 5 out of 10.
Only a 5.
Yeah, the fundamental lack of true hostels means your daily floor price is just too high. You are burning around $135 a day just to sleep and eat basic food. Wow. Unless you are an absolute fanatic for vintage trains and are willing to travel strictly in the shoulder season with a Go Explore card. The Isle of Wight is a much better, cheaper budget pick.
That makes perfect sense. The math just doesn't support the backpacker lifestyle there. What about our mid-range couple? The ones willing to spend a bit for a nice view.
I give it a 7 out of 10 for a mid-range couple. However, that score is highly conditional.
Conditional on what?
It is deeply rewarding if you play the logistics game correctly, meaning if you go car light, if you fly in to save the ferry cost, if you use the Go Explore card, and if you visit in the sweet spots of May or September. If you do all that, it offers a wonderfully safe, highly distinctive, romantic break.
But what if you don't?
If you try to do it in July and you pay $470 to bring a car, that score drops to a 4 out of 10 because you are vastly overpaying for the experience.
Makes sense. What about family travelers?
6 out of 10. Again, conditional. It is only worth it if your kids genuinely love history, castles, and riding old trains. If they want water slides and hot beaches, this trip will be a disaster.
And the food cost.
Financially, it is only viable if you are willing to book a self-catering apartment to avoid those punishing $28 a head dining costs. And remember the weather warning. A wet week trapped indoors with kids on the Isle of Man is brutal.
What about the luxury traveler, the person who has a massive budget and wants to be pampered?
5 out of 10. The high-end market here is just too thin. There are nice places, sure, but they don't justify a true luxury budget. If you have $600 a day to spend, a high-end Scottish country house hotel on the Isle of Mull or the mainland islands will give you a far more polished, dramatic, and luxurious experience.
And finally, the digital nomad, the remote worker looking for a 1-month base to code or write.
4 out of 10. It's just a poor fit. It is too quiet, it is way too expensive, and it fundamentally lacks the short-term rental and co-working infrastructure that nomads rely on. Save your money and go to a mainland UK city or head to Southern Europe.
So if I am summarizing your matrix correctly, basically, if I am not a dedicated train nerd, a deep history buff, or a hardcore motorcycle fanatic, you are telling me to look elsewhere. You were explicitly telling me to go to Scotland or the Isle of Wight.
I am. The Isle of Man is deeply, profoundly rewarding for a very narrow, highly specific type of traveler. It is not a catch-all tourist trap that tries to be everything to everyone.
It knows what it is.
Exactly. It doesn't have mega resorts. It doesn't have massive water parks. It doesn't have a vibrant clubbing scene. And honestly, that lack of mass appeal is exactly why it remains so incredibly unique.
Let's summarize our core thesis today, then. The Isle of Man is a beautiful, remarkably safe, and fascinating time capsule of Celtic and Victorian history. But the friction required to get there, the confusing new ETA rules, the wildly expensive car ferries, the rigid limits of the public transport, and the high cost of daily life makes it a highly deliberate choice. You do not accidentally vacation on the Isle of Man. You have to really, really want to be there.
You certainly don't go by accident. And if we connect this localized deep dive to the bigger picture of global travel right now, I want to leave you with a philosophical thought to ponder.
Let's hear it.
We live in an era where mass tourism is actively homogenizing the globe. Everywhere you look, destinations are becoming overcrowded, the rough edges are being smoothed out, and ancient cities are being turned into generic, crowded backdrops for social media.
Right, the Venice problem. Or Santorini, places that have been loved to death because they became too easy, too accessible, and too famous.
Exactly. So consider this provocative idea. Is the high friction of the Isle of Man actually its greatest asset?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about the $26 ETA permit that turns away casual travelers. Think about the $470 ferry that discourages people from clogging the tiny roads with cars. Think about the lack of cheap mega resorts and budget dorm beds. Is all of that friction actually a built-in defense mechanism?
Like it protects the island.
Perhaps these logistical traps that we spent the last hour unpacking are exactly what keeps the island's unique culture intact. It forces you to do the research, it forces you to pay a premium, it forces you to really want to be there. And by filtering out the casual, accidental, mass-market tourists, that friction prevents the Isle of Man from becoming just another crowded, generic destination.
That is a fascinating way to look at it.
Yeah.
The barriers to entry are the exact walls that preserve the magic inside. It completely flips the script on what makes a good tourist destination.
It does.
It goes right back to what we discussed at the start. You cannot just drop this island into a neat little categorization box. It demands effort, it demands logistical rigor. But if you are the right kind of traveler, that effort pays off in an experience you literally cannot find anywhere else in the world.
Well said.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day.
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.